During my son's funeral, his wife's lover bent close to me and muttered, "Relax, old man. I'll put his millions to far better use than he ever did." And in that very instant, my son let out a faint laugh inside the coffin, because that man had no idea what was really happening. "I'm grateful you're here. Stay with me until the very end, and tell me the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled." Never in my darkest thoughts did I imagine I would have to bury my own child. At 62, I always believed Milton would someday be the one mourning me, not the reverse. Yet on March 18, 2024, I found myself staring at a polished mahogany casket that was said to hold my 37-year-old son. The halls of Morrison Funeral Home were heavy with the scent of lilies and sorrow. Low murmurs of sympathy drifted through the air, blending with the soft swish of black clothing. I stood in the front row, fingers locked together so tightly they ached, my knuckles drained of color. Beside me sat Milton's wife, Mallory, gently pressing a tissue to her eyes in a way that felt more rehearsed than heartfelt. Just 3 days before, the phone rang and tore my world apart. They told me Milton had collapsed at his office from a severe heart attack. By the time the paramedics got there, nothing could be done. 37 years old, strong, energetic, full of life, gone because his heart simply stopped. The doctor explained that sometimes it happens, especially when someone carries the pressure of managing a $12 million empire. I was expected to be shattered. I was supposed to crumble. Yet as I stood there listening to the pastor speak in a steady monotone about eternal rest and heavenly peace, a quiet unease settled inside me. It wasn't only the unnatural pain of laying your child to rest. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. The room was crowded. Milton had built a strong reputation in the business world, admired by partners and surrounded by friends, or so I had always thought. But as one guest after another approached the casket, offering polished yet empty condolences, certain details began to stand out. Mallory's sorrow felt measured, almost strategic. She wept at exactly the appropriate moments, received sympathy with flawless poise, and somehow appeared strikingly elegant in her tailored black designer dress. For a woman who had supposedly lost the love of her life after 9 years of marriage, she seemed unusually steady. And then there was Derek Morrison, Milton's business associate, and allegedly Mallory's close friend. He lingered near the back, but his focus wasn't on the casket. It was on her. Whenever she shifted, his eyes tracked her movements. If she spoke to someone, he subtly tuned in. When she nervously brushed her hair aside, he leaned forward ever so slightly, as though an unseen thread tied them together. I had crossed paths with Derek countless times over the years. He had been Milton's closest confidant in the firm, the numbers man who managed the finances while my son oversaw daily operations. Polished in every sense, with immaculate hair and tailored suits that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries, Derek was the kind of individual who evaluated everything based on profit and advantage. To him, worth was always calculated. The ceremony seemed endless. One by one, people stepped forward to share carefully worded memories of Milton. Tidy, polished stories that barely resembled the layered, complicated man I had raised. My son had been driven and bold, sometimes impulsive, but deeply devoted to the people he cared about. Yet from the way they described him, you'd think he had been flawless, a man who never lost his temper or made a single misstep. When the moment arrived for the family's final farewell, my legs felt unbearably heavy as I moved toward the casket. Milton lay there, hands gently crossed over his chest, dressed in the navy suit I had given him on his wedding day. His complexion was pale, yet calm, almost boyish, as though the years had somehow slipped away. I bent closer and whispered, "I'm going to miss you, son. I'm sorry I couldn't keep you safe." As I stepped aside, Mallory made her way forward. Her act was impeccable, the heartbroken widow bidding a last goodbye to her cherished husband. She rested a single white rose against his chest and leaned down to murmur words too soft for me to catch. Then, without warning, Derek was standing beside me. I hadn't seen him approach. Suddenly he was there, near enough that the sharp scent of his cologne filled the air between us. He tilted his head toward me, his lips barely moving as he spoke words that shattered the fragile calm I'd been holding on to. "Don't worry, old man," he breathed, his tone low but laced with smug certainty. "I'll handle his millions far better than he ever could." The sentence struck like a punch to the gut. I turned sharply to face him, but his features were composed, almost indifferent. For a split second, I questioned my own ears. Had grief begun playing tricks on my mind? And then the impossible occurred. From within the coffin came a sound that turned my veins to ice, a faint laugh, soft and subtle, yet undeniably Milton's. My fingers dug into the polished wood as my pulse thundered in my chest. Derek had heard it too. The color drained from his face, and he instinctively stepped back. Strangely, the service carried on as if nothing had happened, no one else reacting, no sign that they had noticed a thing. "Did you hear?" I began, turning toward Derek. But he was already retreating, moving briskly toward the exit, without looking back. I fixed my eyes on Milton's unmoving face, desperately hunting for the slightest twitch or breath. There was none. His chest remained still. His eyelids didn't flicker. He appeared exactly as he should have, like a man laid to rest. And yet I was certain of what I had heard. That quiet, familiar chuckle, the one that always surfaced when Milton found irony in a situation. It was the same sound he made as a boy, whenever he held on to a secret the grown-ups hadn't uncovered. The same triumphant laugh, after he defeated me at chess for the very first time. That laugh always meant one thing: he was several moves ahead of everyone else. The remainder of the service slipped past me in a haze. I performed the expected rituals, accepting sympathies, clasping hands, offering solemn nods, but my thoughts were in chaos. Derek's murmur replayed over and over in my head. "I'll spend his millions better than he ever did." What was he implying? And how could my son laugh from inside a coffin? As the crowd slowly thinned, I found myself alone beside the casket for a brief moment. Mallory stood outside, gracefully receiving the last bouquets and well-wishes. The funeral director was occupied with preparations for the burial scheduled the following day. I bent down once more, lowering my voice to a breath. "Milton, son, if you can hear me." Silence answered. No movement, no hidden amusement, only the heavy stillness that belongs to death. But when I straightened, something caught my eye and my stomach tightened instantly. Milton's wedding band was gone. The plain gold ring I had stood beside him to choose 9 years earlier, the ring he never removed, was no longer on his finger. Panic flickered through me. Perhaps it had been taken off as part of the funeral process. Yet from what I knew, wedding rings were usually left in place, a final symbol of devotion and identity. Removing it would have been unusual. So where had it gone? And why did its disappearance feel like another fragment of a much larger mystery I was only starting to see? The drive back home felt unbearable. Red lights lingered endlessly. The road seemed to stretch without end. My mind replayed every detail from the funeral home again and again. Derek's venomous whisper, Milton's impossible laugh, the absent wedding ring, each piece circling like it was trying to form a truth I wasn't ready to face. On their own, none of those details added up. But when I placed them side by side, they formed an image I wasn't prepared to face. When I stepped inside my house, it felt cavernous and lifeless. I had been living there alone ever since my wife Sarah passed away 8 years earlier. Yet it had never felt this desolate. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating, pressing against my ears like a tangible force. I poured myself a generous splash of whiskey and lowered into my recliner, my gaze drifting to the framed photographs on the table beside me. Milton at his high school graduation, smiling with unshakable confidence. Milton and Mallory on their wedding day, radiant as if they were characters in a storybook romance. Milton just last Christmas, laughing at a joke that now escaped my memory. The shrill ring of the phone shattered the stillness. It was Mallory. Her tone was soft, fragile, almost breakable. "Joelle, I just wanted to thank you for today." Milton would have been proud of how beautiful everything was. "Yes," I replied, my throat tightening. It was beautiful. There was a brief pause before she continued. "I know this is hard, but we should discuss the arrangements. The attorney wants to meet next week about the will and the company. Derek thinks we should." Derek thinks. The whiskey in my system gave my voice an edge it might not have had otherwise. Since when does Derek make decisions for our family? Silence lingered for a beat. "He's been incredibly supportive, Joel. I honestly don't know how I'd manage without him right now. I'm sure you don't, I thought bitterly, but I didn't say it aloud. We'll talk later, Mallory. I need time. After ending the call, I remained seated as darkness slowly swallowed the room. The fragments of something dreadful were beginning to connect in my mind. Derek's venomous whisper, Mallory's too perfect morning, the vanished wedding ring, and that impossible sound of Milton laughing from inside a coffin. Something wasn't just wrong. It was deeply, dangerously wrong. And I intended to uncover the truth. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11 as I finally forced myself toward bed. But sleep refused to come. Each time I shut my eyes, I heard it again, that quiet, knowing chuckle. Milton's laugh, always carrying secrets, always hinting at moves made in advance. What did you discover, son? I wondered, staring at the ceiling in the dark. And how am I supposed to uncover it when you're meant to be gone forever? Outside my window, an engine suddenly roared to life and a car pulled away into the night. At the time, I barely registered it. It wouldn't be until morning that I realized someone had been parked outside my house, watching, waiting to see what conclusions the grieving old man might reach next. I didn't sleep at all. How could I possibly rest? Each time my eyes drifted shut, that faint, knowing laugh replayed in my mind, bouncing off the polished walls of that mahogany coffin. By 5 in the morning, I surrendered to the inevitable and shuffled into the kitchen to brew coffee, my fingers unsteady as I scooped the grounds. The morning news murmured from the television, filling the silence, but I absorbed none of it. My thoughts were trapped in the same relentless loop. How does someone declared dead manage to laugh? Why had Derek spoken with such certainty about taking control of Milton's fortune? And what had happened to my son's wedding band? I needed clarity, and I knew exactly where to begin. St. Mary's Hospital stood at the edge of town, a towering block of concrete that seemed built to withstand humanity's worst tragedies. I had passed it countless times over the years without a second glance, never imagining I would one day walk through its entrance, searching for the truth about my son's final hours. At the reception desk, a weary-looking woman with gentle eyes directed me toward the cardiac wing. My footsteps echoed sharply against the gleaming floors as I moved through hallways scented with antiseptic and quiet sorrow. The physician who had officially declared Milton's death was Dr. Patricia Wells. She appeared younger than I had pictured, early 40s perhaps, with streaks of gray already threading through her neatly pinned hair. The moment I introduced myself as Milton's father, her professional composure softened into rehearsed compassion. Mr. Holloway, I'm truly sorry for your loss, she said gently. Your son arrived too late for us to intervene. From everything we saw, it happened very suddenly. I need to understand, I replied, lowering myself into the rigid plastic chair opposite her desk. Milton was in excellent shape. He worked out, never smoked, rarely touched alcohol. How does a 37-year-old man collapse from cardiac arrest without warning? She turned to her computer, pulling up his records. A slight crease formed between her brows as she reviewed the details. In some cases, there are no obvious signs. Stress alone can trigger catastrophic events. Was he dealing with unusual pressure recently? The question lingered. Milton had always thrived on ambition, but in recent months he had changed, more guarded. Phone conversations would end abruptly when I entered the room. Our regular Sunday dinners were canceled with vague explanations about being overwhelmed at work. At the time, I had chalked it up to business demands. Now doubt crept in. Can you tell me who brought him here? I asked. My voice steady but urgent. His business partner, Derek Morrison, she replied. He said he discovered Mr. Holloway collapsed in his office around 6:30 that evening. I studied her carefully, and that didn't strike anyone as unusual. That Derek just happened to be there that late? A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. Mr. Holloway, I understand you're searching for clarity, but sometimes tragedies don't come with neat explanations. I leaned closer to her desk. Doctor, just answer this honestly. From a medical standpoint, was there anything about my son's case that didn't sit right with you? She hesitated, tapping her fingers lightly against the surface, before releasing a quiet sigh. The only irregularity was the speed at which rigor mortis began. Typically, it takes several hours to set in. In your son's case, muscular stiffness appeared much sooner than expected. My pulse quickened. What could cause that? Intense physical strain before death, certain substances in the system, environmental influences. She paused briefly. Or an inaccurate time of death. A chill crept through me. Inaccurate? What do you mean? If someone passed away earlier than reported, and the body was preserved in a cold environment, it could explain why rigidity appeared accelerated once it was examined. She quickly straightened. But that scenario would be highly unlikely here. Unlikely. Not impossible. I thanked Dr. Patricia Wells and walked out of St. Mary's Hospital with my mind racing. If Milton had died earlier than Derek claimed, then the timeline was fabricated, which meant Derek had lied about finding him at 6:30. But for what reason? And how could he have kept a body cold long enough to manipulate the signs? My next destination was Milton's office tower, a sleek 20-story building dominating the center of the financial district. The elevator hummed as it carried me to the 15th floor, where Holloway Morrison Enterprises occupied the entire level. When the doors opened, the familiar reception desk came into view. Jennifer, the young receptionist I'd met at more than one company holiday gathering, looked startled when she saw me. Mr. Holloway. I didn't expect, we're all deeply sorry about Milton. Thank you, Jennifer, I said gently. I was hoping to step into Milton's office. There may be a few personal belongings I'd like to collect. Her eyes shifted uneasily toward the large corner office at the end of the hall. I'm really sorry, Mr. Holloway. But Mr. Morrison instructed that no one is to enter the office until the attorneys finish reviewing everything. Derek said that. I asked carefully, forcing my tone to remain steady. She nodded. He mentioned it was for legal protection, something about safeguarding company documents. Then she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Honestly, he hasn't seemed like himself since. He's been coming in every single night, sorting through files, making calls. Every night? Yes, sir. Even yesterday. He stayed until nearly midnight. She hesitated. I only know because I forgot my purse and had to come back. That was the day of the funeral. The unease inside me deepened. Why would Derek bury himself in paperwork on the very day Milton was laid to rest? What could possibly be so pressing? Jennifer, I said gently, think back to the evening Milton died. What time did Derek leave? She paused, replaying it in her mind. That's what's strange. When I left at 5, he was still here, but he told me he was heading out too. He looked rushed, like he needed to be somewhere. My stomach tightened. If Derek walked out at 5 but later claimed he discovered Milton at 6:30, then where had he been during that missing hour and a half? Before I could press further, the elevator doors slid open again. Derek stepped out. As always, he was flawlessly dressed, every detail in place. But the faint shadows beneath his eyes hinted that sleep hadn't been kind to him either. Joel. He stopped short, genuine surprise flickering across his face. I didn't expect to see you here. What brings you in? I came to gather a few of Milton's personal belongings, I replied, studying him closely for any crack in his composure. Of course, of course. He adjusted his cuff. Though the lawyers recommended we keep the office sealed for now. Liability issues, you understand. Once the estate matters are finalized, his voice trailed off, and his gaze slipped away from mine for just a moment. Derek, I said evenly, may I ask you something? Jennifer mentioned you've been staying late every night since Milton passed. That seems like unusual timing. His jaw flexed slightly. Someone has to ensure operations continue. Milton would have expected that, and you were here the night he died. Working late. His posture stiffened. I've already provided statements to both the authorities and the medical staff. Milton collapsed around 6:30. I found him and immediately called emergency services. His tone sharpened, defensive now. But Jennifer said you left at 5. Jennifer must be mistaken, Derek snapped, a flush creeping up his neck. It's been an emotional few days for everyone. Before I could challenge him again, he muttered a quick excuse and slipped into Milton's office, shutting the door with deliberate firmness. In that brief second before it closed, I noticed piles of documents scattered across the desk, and what appeared to be an open safe tucked into the corner. As the elevator carried me down, Jennifer's words replayed in my thoughts. Derek had been there every night, digging through files that belonged to a man who was no longer alive to defend what was his. My final stop that afternoon was Morrison Funeral Home. I asked to speak privately with the director about the condition in which Milton's body had been received. Harold Morrison, a slender man with bloodless hands and a permanently mournful expression, escorted me into his office. "Mr. Holloway, I trust everything was satisfactory yesterday. Your son appeared very peaceful." "He did," I replied evenly. "I wanted to ask about his personal belongings, specifically his wedding ring." Harold flipped through his intake paperwork. "There's no record of a wedding band noted upon arrival. Occasionally, jewelry is removed at the hospital during treatment. But wouldn't it be returned afterward?" "In most cases, yes, unless..." He hesitated. "Unless what?" "Unless a family member requested it for safekeeping. It's not uncommon for valuable items to be handed to a spouse prior to the service. So Mallory could have taken it, but if she had, why hadn't she said a word?" Harold cleared his throat again. "There was something else that stood out. Your son's body was significantly colder than we typically expect. Normally, by the time someone arrives from the hospital, their temperature has begun to stabilize. But he was still extremely cold, almost as though he had been stored in refrigeration. That aligned with what Dr. Patricia Wells had told me about the accelerated rigor mortis. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Either Milton had passed away much earlier than reported, or his body had been deliberately kept cold after death. Driving home, my mind churned through possibilities, none of them innocent. Derek had falsified the timeline. Milton's body bore signs of refrigeration. His wedding ring had vanished, and Derek had been combing through confidential files every night since the death. The fragments were aligning into a picture I didn't want to see clearly, because if my suspicions were correct, then Milton's death wasn't a tragic accident. It was something far more deliberate. Just as I pulled into my driveway, my phone rang. It was Mallory. Her voice trembled on the other end. "Joelle, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight? There's something important about Milton I have to tell you." My pulse quickened. "What kind of important?" "I can't explain over the phone. It's about why he'd been acting differently lately. Please, Joel, you deserve to know the truth." After the call ended, I remained behind the wheel for several long minutes, staring at the quiet outline of my house. The truth. At last, someone was willing to speak it aloud about what had happened to my son. Yet as I stepped out of the car and made my way toward the front door, a heavy dread settled in my chest. What if the truth was darker than anything I had prepared myself to face? If Milton truly had been distant, secretive, if he had been hiding something in those final weeks, then perhaps his death wasn't some cruel twist of fate. Perhaps it had been planned. Perhaps someone had wanted him gone. And perhaps that same someone was now positioning themselves to claim everything he had built. The lock clicked softly as I entered the hollow stillness of my home. I paused just inside, wondering whether I was ready for whatever Mallory was about to reveal. Night was closing in, and somewhere across the city, Derek Morrison was likely seated in my son's office, sorting through confidential documents, searching for whatever leverage he needed to secure control of $12 million. But there was one thing Derek hadn't considered, one detail that refused to leave my mind. Dead men don't laugh. And if Milton had laughed inside that coffin, then maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lifeless as everyone believed. Mallory's house stood on Elm Street, like a polished trophy of achievement. Milton had purchased it for her 3 years earlier. A sprawling colonial estate framed by immaculate hedges and wide windows that caught even the faintest trace of evening light. I had never felt entirely comfortable there. The decor was elegant, yes, but impersonal. Every piece of furniture and artwork seemed selected for its cost rather than its meaning. Tonight, that unease was sharper than ever. Mallory opened the door dressed in a flowing black silk robe, her hair pinned back in a style that appeared effortless yet deliberate. Her eyes were rimmed with red, though I couldn't tell whether it came from real tears or skillful cosmetics. "Joel, thank you for coming," she said softly, stepping aside to let me enter. "I know this hasn't been easy for either of us," she murmured. The living room was bathed in low light. Candles flickered along the mantel beneath an oversized wedding portrait of Milton and Mallory. In that photograph, he looked impossibly young, optimistic, untouched by whatever storm had followed. The man smiling down at us had no warning of how his story would twist. You said there was something important I needed to hear, I said, skipping any polite small talk. Mallory poured herself a glass of wine, her hands unsteady as the liquid splashed into the bowl. Would you like one? I'd prefer the truth. She gave a faint nod and lowered herself into the armchair opposite me, clutching the glass as though it steadied her. Milton had been different these past few months, withdrawn, guarded. He'd vanish for hours without telling me where he was, take phone calls in private, calls he refused to let me overhear. In what way guarded? I pressed. He moved into the guest room, claimed his insomnia would keep me awake. He started leaving before sunrise and returning late at night, saying he was tied up with a confidential project. She swallowed a sip of wine. I thought he was cheating on me. The accusation landed hard. Milton wouldn't do that. That's what I believed too. At first, her voice wavered. Then I discovered payment slips for a storage unit on the other side of town. He'd rented it under a different name. A chill crept up my spine. You followed him? She nodded slowly. One afternoon. And? My pulse was hammering now. Instead of answering directly, she rose and crossed to a writing desk tucked into the corner. From a drawer, she withdrew a thick manila envelope and handed it to me, her fingers trembling. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Milton speaking with unfamiliar men in parking lots. Milton stepping into what appeared to be a modest apartment complex. Milton seated in his car outside our family attorney's office. And most unsettling of all, Milton standing in conversation with Dr. Harrison, a longtime friend who worked at St. Mary's Hospital. I don't understand, I murmured, though a quiet, dreadful possibility was already beginning to take shape in my mind. A dark realization was beginning to take shape in my thoughts. There's more, Mallory whispered, her voice so faint I had to lean forward to hear it. I hired someone to follow him. She covered her mouth briefly, as if the memory itself tasted bitter. What did you find? Her eyes met mine. Milton knew, Joel. He knew about Derek and me. The confession settled between us like poison in the air. I could only stare at her. You and Derek? This time, when the tears fell, they didn't look rehearsed. They fell freely. It started 6 months ago. I felt invisible. Milton was consumed by work, and Derek was always around. He paid attention. He made me feel valued. She shook her head, shame flickering across her face. I never planned for it to happen. And Milton found out? The investigator I hired to track Milton, he told me Milton had hired him first to follow me. A hollow, humorless laugh slipped from her. We were spying on each other, both uncovering things we never wanted to know. My thoughts raced. If Milton had discovered the affair, then Derek's smug whisper at the funeral carried a different weight. It wasn't just greed, it was triumph. But one question towered above all the others. Mallory, how did Milton actually die? She looked at me then, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't guilt, it was fear. That's the problem, Joel, she said quietly. I don't believe he did. The words made the room feel unstable, as if the floor had shifted beneath me. What are you saying? The night he was declared dead, I was at Derek's apartment. We can confirm each other's whereabouts. But Milton, he had been preparing something. The storage unit wasn't random. It was filled with paperwork, bundles of cash, and forged identification. It looked like someone getting ready to vanish. I tightened my grip on the chair's arms, steadying myself. You're suggesting he staged this? I'm saying it's possible. She drew in a shaky breath. Dr. Harrison was his college roommate. They've known each other for 2 decades, and he works at St. Mary's Hospital. The implication didn't need to be spoken aloud. If anyone could pull something like that off, she continued quietly, it would be a doctor with access to certificates, hospital records, even the morgue. And suddenly, everything aligned with chilling precision. Milton's secrecy, his private meetings with Dr. Harrison, the conflicting timeline, a body delivered colder than it should have been, rigor mortis setting in too fast, even that faint, impossible laugh from inside the coffin. Why would he go this far? I asked. Though deep down, the answer was already forming. Mallory moved toward the window and stared out at the darkened street. Think about it, Joel. If Milton truly died, who inherits everything? She didn't wait for me to respond. Me, the grieving widow, And who have I been confiding in? Derek, his business partner. The one man who understands every cent flowing through that company. He wanted proof, I said slowly, the magnitude of it settling in. He wanted to see what you and Derek would do if you believed he was gone. Her shoulders sagged, and we didn't disappoint him. We've already discussed liquidating certain assets, shifting funds, even restructuring ownership. Derek suggested selling the company outright and relocating to the Cayman Islands. The words made my stomach turn. My son had staged his own death to reveal the truth about the two people closest to him. The pain of betrayal must have been unbearable. But Milton had chosen a ruthless, calculated way to confront it. Where is he now? I asked. She shook her head. I honestly don't know. But there's more. More. I wasn't certain I could endure anything heavier than what I'd already heard, but I gestured for her to continue. Derek's intentions go beyond money, she said, turning to face me. Her face had drained of color. He's been looking into how quickly someone can be declared legally dead. He's been pushing for it to happen fast, faster than normal. A cold unease crept up my spine. And he's been asking about you, she added softly. Your health, your finances, whether you've updated your will. About me? He sees you as the last barrier standing between him and total control of Milton's estate. Her voice dropped to a tremor. Joel, I think he was planning to make sure you weren't a problem for much longer. I think he was arranging for an accident. The magnitude of it struck me all at once. Derek hadn't simply betrayed Milton by seducing his wife. He had allegedly been preparing to eliminate both of us for financial gain, and Milton, having uncovered the plot, had chosen an extreme solution: disappear before they could make their move. We need to locate him, I said, rising to my feet. If Derek is accelerating the legal process, Milton could be in real danger. There's something else, Mallory added, moving quickly to the desk drawer. She removed a small brass key and held it out to me. I discovered this hidden in Milton's home office. I think it belongs to the storage unit. I accepted it, my fingers unsteady. She scribbled the address onto a slip of paper and handed it over. Joel, what if we're wrong? She asked quietly. What if Milton really did die, and we're just building fantasies because we can't face reality? I remembered that faint, unmistakable laugh from inside the coffin, soft, deliberate, undeniably my son's. Then we'll know, I said. But if he's alive and this has gone further than he intended, we may be the only ones who can stop it. The drive across town felt endless. Questions circled relentlessly. If Milton had staged this, why hadn't he reached out to me? How long had he been orchestrating such an elaborate deception? And what was the final objective? Revenge? Escape? Justice? The storage complex stood at the edge of the city, a cluster of metal structures behind chain-link fencing. It was just before 10, the lot nearly empty, except for a lone guard who barely glanced up as I entered. Unit 73 was positioned toward the back, shielded from the street. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the padlock. It turned without resistance. The metal door screeched upward, breaking the silence. Inside, the sight stole my breath. The space wasn't a simple storage locker. It was organized like an operations center. Corkboards lined the walls, pinned with photographs, printed emails, and annotated documents. A compact desk held neatly stacked financial statements, legal drafts, and small pieces of electronic equipment that resembled surveillance tools. And in the far corner, a small refrigerator hummed steadily. I opened it. Inside were sealed vials accompanied by handwritten instructions I recognized instantly as Milton's. The label on one container read, "Temporary paralysis agent, induces symptoms consistent with cardiac arrest." I stood there in stunned silence. My son hadn't died. He had engineered his own medical crisis, drugging himself to simulate death with clinical precision. I was still frozen in place, staring at the labeled vials in the refrigerator, when the sound of footsteps scraped against the concrete behind me. I turned, half expecting Milton to step out of the shadows. Instead, Derek filled the doorway. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his usually flawless hair out of place. In his hand, steady and unmistakable, was a gun aimed directly at my chest. "Evening, Joel," he said calmly. "I was curious how long it would take you to uncover this." My throat tightened. "Derek, what is this?" He gave a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Milton used to say you were sharper than most. Looks like he was right. He stepped inside, forcing me to retreat deeper into the unit. You're here for answers. So am I. The difference is, I've already found mine. And what answers would those be? Confirmation that your son is not only brilliant, but dangerously so. And he needs to be dealt with before he destroys everything. His finger shifted slightly on the trigger. So here's the real question, he continued. Are you going to help me locate him, or are you going to become another loose end? I met his gaze and felt a chill settle into my bones. This wasn't greed alone. This was desperation, the kind that makes a man irreversible. Somewhere out there, Milton was alive, unaware that the man he'd tried to outmaneuver had uncovered the entire scheme. The gun looked massive under the flickering fluorescent light. I had never faced a weapon before. It felt unreal, like watching a scene unfold from outside my own body. You don't have to do this, I said quietly, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. Derek let out a laugh, but it held none of Milton's warmth. It was brittle, edged with bitterness. I don't want to, but your son forced this situation. Milton is dead, I said carefully, probing him. He rolled his eyes. Don't insult me. Temporary paralysis agents, a cooperative doctor, altered hospital documentation, even a conveniently unquestioning funeral director. He gestured around the makeshift command center. It's almost admirable. My stomach dropped. If he knew all of this, then Milton's advantage was gone. How long have you known? I asked. I started getting suspicious when the will reading was delayed. The attorney blamed technical inconsistencies. I knew that was nonsense. His expression sharpened, so I dug deeper. That's how I found this. He glanced toward the corkboards. Your son's been quite productive lately. Did you know he transferred $12 million out of his accounts 3 weeks before his death? The number hit me like a punch. Every cent moved. Where did he send it? That, Derek said coldly, pulling a phone from his jacket with his free hand. He extended the device toward me without lowering the gun. You're going to call him. I don't know how to reach him, I replied. A slow, knowing grin spread across his face. Oh, Joel, he said softly. You absolutely do. Derek spoke with calm, almost condescending patience, as if he were spelling out the obvious. Milton would have left you a way to reach him. He's far too sentimental to cut his father out of something this dramatic. The more I thought about it, the more I realized he was probably right. If Milton had orchestrated his own death, he wouldn't have abandoned me without a clue. There had to be a method, some subtle signal meant only for me, and then it clicked. The grandfather clock in my hallway had been chiming at strange, irregular hours for weeks. I'd blamed old wiring, assumed it needed maintenance. But what if Milton had adjusted it? What if those uneven chimes weren't random at all, but a pattern, a message? Derek must have caught the shift in my expression because his grip tightened on the gun. There it is, he murmured. You've figured it out. Before I could respond, his phone vibrated. He glanced down and the color drained from his face. Well now, he muttered. Speak of the devil. He turned the screen toward me. A message from an unknown number read, Storage unit compromised. Move to backup location. Package is secure. Milton? I breathed. Derek gave a slow nod. Your son's been watching. The only mystery is how long. He scanned the room as though expecting hidden eyes in every shadow. That's when I saw it. A tiny red light blinking near the ceiling in the corner. Milton had installed cameras. He knew we were here. He knew Derek had discovered the hideout. And worst of all, he knew Derek was armed. He's coming, I whispered, more to myself than to the man holding the gun. Oh, I'm counting on it, Derek replied coldly. When he walks through that door, you're going to persuade him to transfer that $12 million back where it belongs. Do that, and I won't redecorate this unit with your blood. The icy precision in his voice turned my stomach. This wasn't impulse. This was strategy. He wasn't angry. He was methodical. To him, people weren't lives. They were inconveniences. What about Mallory? I asked. She knows everything now. Derek let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Mallory isn't going anywhere. She's too involved to risk the police, and too frightened to defy me. He gave a small shrug, and she doesn't even know about this. He tapped the gun lightly. A deeper dread settled over me. You're planning to kill her too. In time, he said without emotion. Loose ends have a way of unraveling things. He checked his watch. But one problem at a time. Your son should be here any second. As if summoned by fate itself, a car engine echoed outside. Derek gestured with the weapon, forcing me toward the back wall while keeping it trained on my chest. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat louder than the last. Footsteps approached, measured, careful. Then a voice drifted into the dim space. A voice I had mourned only days ago. Dad, are you in there? Milton. Alive. Real. Walking straight into a snare. Tell him to come inside. Derek whispered sharply. And don't even think about warning him. You'll be dead before he finishes his next step. My throat closed. The words refused to form. How could I call him forward? How could I become the trap that destroyed my own son? Dad? Milton's voice was right outside now, only a few feet from the entrance. I'm here. I managed to call back, my voice breaking under the weight of everything. I'm here, son. He stepped into the doorway, and for a split second the world narrowed to just him. The gun, Derek, the danger, all of it faded beneath the crushing relief of seeing my child standing there alive. He looked different, leaner. His hair had grown out, and faint lines framed his eyes, marks of strain and too many sleepless nights. But there was no mistaking him. God, Dad. When I saw Derek's car outside, I thought. He stopped abruptly as his gaze shifted past me and locked onto the figure in the shadows. Well, this is touching, Derek said smoothly, stepping forward so the gun remained aimed at my chest but clearly visible to Milton. Bravo, Milton. The staged death was almost convincing. Milton's eyes flicked from the weapon to me, assessing, calculating. Let him go, Derek. This is between us. Derek's lips curved slightly. What this is about is $12 million that belongs to the company. Your vanishing trick doesn't void our partnership agreement. Partnership. Milton let out a hollow laugh, and this time there was no warmth in it, only sharp-edged resentment. You mean your plan to strip away everything I built while you were sleeping with my wife? A flush crept up Derek's neck. Mallory came to me, Milton. She was lonely. You were too consumed with your empire to notice the woman at home. I've known about the affair for months, Milton replied evenly, and I knew you were arranging to have me killed. The words seemed to detonate in the small space. Derek's grip faltered for just a second. That's absurd. Milton slowly reached into his jacket, careful, deliberate, making sure his hands stayed visible. He withdrew a small digital recorder. August 15, 2024, he said calmly. You and Mallory in your apartment, discussing how to stage an accident for me. Something subtle, natural, soon enough that you could liquidate company assets before suspicion had time to grow. The color drained from Derek's face. That's not possible, he whispered. You were supposed to be dead. The strange thing about dying, Milton said evenly, almost casually, is that it gives you plenty of time to strategize. His composure never wavered. Did you honestly believe I'd sit back and let you dismantle everything I built? Let you come after my father? Derek's desperation twisted into something uglier. He was next, he spat. Old man's heart isn't exactly reliable. Grief does terrible things. Stress pushes people over the edge. Tragic but believable. A blinding fury surged through me. This man hadn't just betrayed us. He had mapped out our deaths like business transactions. The authorities are already on their way. Milton continued steadily. Every word since you stepped inside has been recorded. Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. You're not walking away from this. Derek's eyes flickered wildly. You're lying. Am I? Milton turned his phone toward him. A 911 call had been active for 10 full minutes. Dispatch had heard everything. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder, closer. Derek heard them too, and whatever control he had left shattered. If I'm finished, I'm not going alone, he snarled, swinging the gun toward Milton. I don't remember deciding to act. 1 second I was paralyzed. The next, I lunged. My shoulder slammed into him just as the weapon discharged. The blast roared through the metal unit, deafening. A searing heat sliced across my shoulder as we crashed to the ground. Milton moved instantly, tackling Derek, grappling for the gun. They struggled across the concrete, curses and grunts echoing as the weapon skidded free into the shadows. Ignoring the pain tearing through my arm, I scrambled forward and kicked the gun away moments before red and blue lights flooded the unit. Officers stormed in, barking commands, pulling us apart. Derek was forced into handcuffs, shouting threats even as they dragged him outside. The recorder, the cameras, every scrap of evidence was collected. Paramedics examined my shoulder. Just a graze, they assured me, though it burned like fire. Through the chaos, Milton stayed beside me, his hand firm on my good shoulder. Solid, breathing, alive. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked once things finally quieted. He looked worn down, older than 37. "Because you would have stopped me. You would have searched for another solution. There had to be one. Not this time," he replied softly but firmly. He was going to kill us. The only way to expose him was to make him think he'd already won. I watched as statements were taken, as Derek was shoved into the back of a patrol car, as the storage unit was sealed behind crime scene tape. Milton had gambled everything, his identity, his fortune, even our trust, to reveal the truth before it buried us. "What happens now?" I asked when we finally stepped into the night air together. He exhaled slowly. "Now I figure out how to return from the dead. Legally, it's going to be a nightmare. And Mallory?" His jaw tightened. "She chose her side. Now she lives with it." We stood beside his car, a worn, aging sedan nothing like the luxury vehicles he once drove. Under the harsh parking lot lights, he seemed different, stronger, but guarded, like someone who had learned that betrayal can come from the closest hands. "I'm proud of you," I said at last. That took more courage than I can put into words. For the first time since he stepped through that doorway, he smiled. It was tired, touched with sadness, but real. "I had a good teacher," he said quietly. "You taught me that family is worth defending, whatever the cost." As we pulled away from the storage facility, I understood something Derek never had. This had never truly been about money. It was about loyalty, about deception, about how far a son will go to protect the people he loves. Milton was alive. Our family had survived. And sometimes, that's the only victory that matters. The apartment Milton had been hiding in these past 3 days was small and unremarkable. It was located above a second-hand bookstore at the far edge of town. As we made our way up the tight staircase, my shoulder throbbing from where the bullet had grazed me, I found myself in quiet awe of how completely my son had engineered his return to life. "Dr. Harrison helped me secure this place," Milton said as he unlocked the door. "He's the only one who's known the truth from the start." Inside, the apartment was bare but practical. A narrow bed against the wall, a compact kitchenette, and a desk cluttered with legal files and financial statements. It had the feel of a command post, not a home. The space of someone preparing, step by deliberate step, to reclaim his identity. "Coffee?" Milton asked, moving toward the kitchenette with casual familiarity, as if we were simply sharing an ordinary evening. "Please." I lowered myself into the single-cushioned chair, suppressing a grimace as my shoulder protested. "Milton, we need to discuss what comes next." He paused, scooping grounds into the filter. "I know, Dad, you're going to tell me I should have trusted you, that we could have handled this differently." "Actually," I said quietly, "I was going to tell you I understand." He turned, startled. "Derek intended to kill us. You stopped him. You protected this family." For a moment he said nothing. Then he faced the machine again. But I noticed some of the rigidity leave his posture. "I've been carrying this by myself for months," he admitted. "I forgot what it feels like not to." "You don't have to anymore," I replied, leaning forward despite the sting in my shoulder. "But we're not in the clear yet. Derek's behind bars. But Mallory isn't, and she knows you're alive." Milton nodded, his expression darkening. "I've thought about that. With Derek arrested and everything unraveling, she's looking at serious charges, fraud, conspiracy, possibly even accessory to attempted murder. What's her next move? Disappear?" He handed me a steaming mug and took the chair opposite mine. "She'll panic first," he said. "Then she'll try to secure whatever money she can. You moved the $12 million to an offshore account she can't touch. But she still has access to our joint funds, the house, and a few investment portfolios. I took a slow sip of coffee, considering, roughly how much? Maybe 800,000 altogether, he answered. Not enough to vanish. Permanent escape? No, Milton said quietly, but enough cash to keep her afloat for a while. His face hardened. The real issue is that she's not thinking clearly. When people panic, they make reckless choices. Right on cue, his phone vibrated in his hand. He checked the screen, and all the color drained from his face. What is it? I asked. Without speaking, he turned the phone toward me. A message from Mallory. I know you're alive. Be at the house in 1 hour, or I torch everything. Everything. I repeated. Milton was already crossing to a filing cabinet tucked in the corner. He yanked open a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and emptied its contents across the desk. Photographs and documents fanned out between us. Before I disappeared, I compiled proof, he said. Bank transfers, recorded conversations, pictures of their meetings. He tapped one photo in particular, Derek handing Mallory a bulky envelope in a parking garage. There's more than just the affair and the murder plot, Milton continued. A chill crept up my spine. What do you mean more? Derek's been siphoning money from the company for over 2 years. It started small, then it grew. His jaw tightened. I estimate nearly $3 million. And Mallory? She knew. She helped funnel it into accounts under her maiden name. The weight of it settled heavily in my chest. And now she's threatening to destroy all this? Not just this, Milton replied. Every financial record at the house, hard drives, backup files, anything tying her or Derek to the larger scheme. He dragged a hand through his hair, frustration breaking through his composure. If that evidence disappears, Derek's defense team will have a field day. He'll claim he acted alone, that the murder plot was some isolated breakdown. I didn't need him to spell it out. Without proof of the broader conspiracy, the charges could shrink. Attempted assault instead of premeditated murder, a handful of years instead of life. He could walk free while we spent the rest of our lives glancing over our shoulders. We can't allow that, I said firmly. Milton looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw pride in his eyes. I was hoping you'd say that, he admitted. But Dad, going back there could turn ugly fast. If we face her head on, she could spiral, Milton warned. She's already spiraling, I replied, pushing myself to my feet. I rotated my shoulder carefully. The pain flared, but it was tolerable. So what's the strategy? Milton unrolled a rough sketch of the house on Elm Street across the desk. She expects me to walk in alone. She'll assume she can sway me one last attempt. He glanced up. But I don't intend to be alone. You want me there? I need you there, he corrected. There's a side gate through the garden. While I keep her occupied in the living room, you slip upstairs. He tapped a marked square on the second floor. My office. Behind the bookshelf is a fireproof safe. That's where the critical evidence is stored. I leaned over the map, mentally tracing the route. And if she's armed? He shook his head. Mallory's never relied on weapons. Her strength is persuasion, control. But if this unravels, he lifted his phone, showing me an emergency app. One tap connects me directly to Detective Rodriguez. They'll respond fast. It wasn't flawless, but it beat standing by while she erased the proof that could bury Derek for good. And truthfully, part of me needed to look her in the eye. She hadn't just betrayed my son. She had plotted to end both our lives. And now she wanted to torch the truth to save herself. Fine, I said at last. But we handle this carefully. No heroics. Milton's expression softened into a real smile, the first unguarded one I'd seen since all this began. I couldn't have done any of it without you. An hour later, we were parked halfway down Elm Street. The house stood pristine under the streetlights. Trimmed hedges, polished windows, luxury cars resting in the driveway. It looked untouched by scandal, but now I understood what lay beneath that polished surface. Deception, greed, blood money. Give me 15 minutes, Milton said, checking the time. She'll stall. She'll try to bargain. That's your window to get in and out of the office. I gripped his arm firmly. Stay sharp. Desperation makes people unpredictable. He nodded once. You too, Dad. I watched Milton climb the front steps and press the doorbell. Even from across the street, I could make out Mallory's shadow moving behind the curtain. The air itself felt tight, charged. The door opened. Milton stepped inside. I counted slowly to 60, steadying my breathing, then circled toward the garden gate. Months ago, back when weekends meant trimming hedges and sharing coffee on the patio, Milton had handed me a spare key. That memory felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The side entrance gave way without a sound, and I slipped into the kitchen. The house was unnaturally still, broken only by the low murmur of voices drifting from the living room. I couldn't catch the words, but the rhythm told me enough. Tempers were rising, keeping my steps light. I moved up the back staircase to the second floor. Milton's office looked unchanged. Dark wood desk, leather chair, shelves packed tightly with books, just as he'd described. A wall safe was concealed behind the largest bookcase, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. He had told me the combination: Sarah's birthday, my late wife's. Even while orchestrating his disappearance, he had anchored the code to family. The lock released with a muted click. Inside were neatly stacked documents, several USB drives and compact audio recorders. I gathered everything quickly, stuffing it into the messenger bag I'd brought. Then Mallory's voice sliced through the house. Sharp, furious. "You really believe you're brilliant, don't you? Faking your death, humiliating me like this?" Milton answered, but too softly for me to hear. Whatever he said only fueled her rage. "Well, husband," she shouted, "I've got surprises too." A heavy crash echoed below. My stomach dropped. Forgetting caution, I ran for the stairs, the bag pressed tight against my chest. When I reached the living room, the sight froze me in place. Milton stood backed against the fireplace, palms raised in surrender. 10 feet away, Mallory faced him, not with a gun, but with something that made my blood run colder. In one hand, a gasoline can. In the other, a lighter. "Joel," she said calmly, without looking my way, "I had a feeling you'd appear." She gave a bitter laugh. Milton was always such a devoted son. The fumes hit me then, thick, suffocating. She had drenched the room. The designer sofas, the antique tables, the Persian rugs, even the framed family photos arranged along the mantel were soaked. One flick of her thumb and the entire house would ignite. "Mallory," I said slowly, forcing calm into my voice, "put the lighter down. We can fix this." She laughed, a sharp, splintering sound. "Fix it? Your son destroyed everything. My husband is sitting in a cell because of his twisted little stunt. Derek is in jail because he tried to have us killed." Milton replied evenly, though gasoline fumes thickened the air around him. "He loved me," she snapped, and whatever composure she had left fractured. "He was going to take care of me, give me the life I was meant to have, and you and your paranoia wrecked it." I noticed Milton's fingers shift slightly toward his pocket. Mallory saw it too. "Don't," her voice dropped to something deadly quiet. "If that phone comes out, I strike this flame, and we all go up together." She sparked the lighter. A small, hungry flame swayed in her hand. "You want your precious files?" she taunted. "Your bank statements? Your recordings? Let's see how valuable they are in ashes." That's when it hit me. She knew about the safe. She must have found it. This wasn't blind rage. It was calculated destruction. If she couldn't win, she would erase the board entirely. Her gaze shifted to the bag clutched against my chest. "Hand it over." I glanced at Milton. In his eyes I saw it, the rapid weighing of consequences. We were cornered. If I surrendered the evidence, Derek might slip through the cracks. If I refused, she might set the fire anyway, and we'd all be lost along with the proof. But Mallory didn't know something. Milton's phone wasn't in his pocket. It was hidden in his shoe, already connected to Detective Rodriguez, streaming every word in real time. Milton met my eyes and formed a single silent word: trust. Then he did the unthinkable. He stepped closer to her, closer to the gasoline-soaked furniture, closer to the trembling hand holding the flame. "You're right," he said gently. "I did destroy the life you had." His voice softened, stripped of anger, but not because I was paranoid, because I loved you, and I couldn't ignore what you were turning into. The words seemed to catch her off guard. The flame wavered slightly as uncertainty flickered across her face. The flame trembled between her fingers. I kept believing you'd come back to me, Milton said softly, taking another careful step forward. Even after I learned about Derek, I thought we could fix it. I thought we could rebuild what we had. Tears streaked down Mallory's face, but her grip on the lighter remained tight. You never loved me, she choked. You loved your company, your money, your father. Milton's voice dropped to almost a whisper. No, I loved you more than any of it. That's why this betrayal cut so deep. For a heartbeat, I thought he was reaching her, thought the flame might die in her hand, and this could end without more destruction. Then the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder by the second. Her expression warped, hurt twisting into fury. You called them. I called because I want you alive, Milton replied. Because despite everything, I don't want this to end with you dead. She turned abruptly, raising the lighter toward the gasoline-soaked curtains. Mallory, don't, I shouted, lunging forward with the bag clutched tight to my chest. But the flame kissed the fabric. The room erupted. What began as a flicker became an inferno in seconds. Fire raced along the curtains, devoured the gasoline-drenched furniture, and surged outward in a wave of blistering heat. The air filled with choking smoke and the sharp stench of burning cloth. Milton seized my arm. Kitchen now. Behind us, Mallory screamed, not in agony but in raw, furious desperation. She had realized too late that this act wouldn't save Derek. It would only consume everything. We pushed through the thickening smoke, coughing, half-blind, as the roar of the blaze swallowed the house. Sirens shrieked just outside. Milton dragged me through the back door, moments before the first fire engines screeched to a stop, red lights flashing violently against the dark sky. The evidence, I rasped, tightening my hold on the messenger bag. It's safe, he assured me, guiding me across the lawn into clean air. Everything we need is right there. Officers were already flooding the property. Firefighters leapt into action, uncoiling hoses, shouting commands. Others secured the perimeter as flames clawed through the windows behind us. Detective Rodriguez hurried over, her face set in grim determination. But when she saw us standing there alive, relief flickered across her features. Are either of you hurt? Detective Rodriguez asked, quickly scanning us for injuries. We're okay, Milton answered, still catching his breath. But Mallory's inside. Almost on cue, shouts erupted near the front of the house. Through the haze of smoke and flashing lights, firefighters emerged carrying a limp figure. Mallory. She was unconscious, her body slack from smoke inhalation but alive. She'll recover, Detective Rodriguez said, watching as paramedics worked over her, and once she's cleared medically, she'll be under arrest. I stood there as they lifted her into the ambulance. Even now, pale and defeated, she was strikingly beautiful. It wasn't hard to see how Milton had fallen for her, or how Derek had gambled everything for her approval. But beauty without integrity is just a polished surface, and Mallory had shown us exactly how empty that surface was. What happens next? I asked quietly. The detective nodded toward the messenger bag still clutched in my hands. Next, we build the strongest case possible. With what you've secured, Derek Morrison is facing attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, and large-scale embezzlement. He's looking at no less than 30 years. She paused. Mallory will be charged with arson, conspiracy, and financial crimes tied to the stolen funds. 15 to 20, most likely. Her tone remained professional, but there was unmistakable resolve behind it. Justice might not undo the damage, but it would be decisive. Milton hadn't moved. He was staring at the flames devouring what used to be his home. I built that house for her, he murmured. Chose every detail, every chair, every painting. I thought if I created the perfect life, she'd finally be happy. You can't purchase happiness, I said gently, and love doesn't come with a price tag. He gave a small nod, but grief lingered in his eyes. No matter what Mallory had done, no matter how far she'd fallen, he had loved her deeply. And that kind of love doesn't simply vanish, because it's betrayed. Mr. Holloway, a young officer approached with a clipboard in hand. We'll need formal statements about everything that happened inside. For the next 2 hours, Milton and I sat in the back of a patrol car beneath flashing lights, recounting every detail from the gasoline to the flame, from the evidence to the threats, while behind us the last of the house collapsed into embers. Milton's carefully staged death, Derek's scheme to seize the company, Mallory's last reckless act to wipe out the proof. Spoken aloud, it sounded unreal, like a thriller too dramatic to belong to ordinary life. But the recordings didn't lie. Milton's hidden call had captured it all. Derek's threats, his admission, Mallory's intent to burn the evidence, paired with the bank statements, photographs, and digital files from the safe. The story was airtight, a conspiracy constructed piece by calculated piece over months. By sunrise, the flames were extinguished. The house still stood, but barely a blackened shell with its heart burned out. The structure remained, yet everything inside had been reduced to ash. The home Milton had built with Mallory, their shared plans, their years together had vanished in smoke. "I'm sorry," I told him quietly as we looked over the wreckage. He shook his head. "Don't be. The fire wasn't necessary, but the ending was. I was clinging to something that never truly existed." Detective Rodriguez approached once more before we left. "Derek Morrison has agreed to plead guilty to every charge," she informed us. "In exchange for life without parole, he's trying to avoid capital punishment." A cold sense of finality settled in me. Derek would spend the rest of his days behind bars, with nothing but time to consider how greed had destroyed him. It wouldn't restore what he'd broken, but it was justice. "What happens to the company?" I asked as Milton and I finally drove away from Elm Street. "Holloway Morrison Enterprises won't survive this," he said. "The name's too damaged. But I've been thinking about starting again. Smaller scale. More meaningful." He glanced at me. "Maybe something we build together." The suggestion caught me off guard. At 62, I'd imagined slowing down, not launching something new. Yet the idea of working beside my son, creating something honest from scratch, stirred something hopeful inside me. "What are you thinking?" I asked. Milton smiled, and this time, it fully reached his eyes. "Security consulting," he said. "Helping people protect themselves from betrayal, fraud, corporate sabotage. After what we've lived through, we know exactly how these schemes unfold." And over the weeks that followed, that idea slowly began to take shape. As the court process unfolded and the press gradually lost interest, Milton and I focused on rebuilding. He moved into the spare bedroom at my place while untangling the legal nightmare of being declared alive again. Apparently, returning from the dead involves more documentation than one might expect. The $12 million he had safeguarded offshore became the foundation of our new venture. We launched Holloway Security Consulting, concentrating on background investigations, fraud detection, and risk analysis. Our earliest clients were local business owners who had followed our story and wanted reassurance that there wasn't a Derek Morrison hiding inside their own operations. Dr. Harrison joined us as a medical consultant. His ability to identify signs of poisoning and drug-induced conditions turned out to be invaluable more than once. Jennifer, Milton's former receptionist, signed on as office manager. She admitted she'd sensed inconsistencies in Derek's timeline the day Milton supposedly died, and she was eager to work somewhere that protected people rather than exploited them. 3 months after the fire, I was seated in my office reviewing a case file when Milton knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Dad, someone's here to see you." I glanced up and noticed the woman standing just behind him. She was tall, with dark hair, perceptive eyes, and a smile that carried warmth without naivety. There was resilience in her posture, the look of someone who had faced hardship and grown stronger from it. "This is Sarah Chen," Milton said. "She's the forensic accountant who helped dismantle Derek's financial scheme." He hesitated, a faint flush rising to his face. "And we've been seeing each other." I rose and offered my hand, studying her carefully. She held my gaze with steady confidence. No evasiveness, no calculated charm. After what Milton had endured, I had wondered whether he would ever open himself to trust again. But there was something grounded about Sarah Chen. Something genuine. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Holloway," she said warmly. "Milton speaks about you all the time." "Please, call me Joel," I replied. "And thank you for the work you did. Untangling Derek's finances couldn't have been simple." A faint smile crossed her face. "Actually, it was rewarding. Financial fraud is my specialty, and Derek Morrison was one of the most meticulous offenders I've encountered. Helping bring him down felt meaningful." We spent the next few minutes discussing the case, our growing firm, and Milton's strange adjustment to being officially alive again. Sarah was thoughtful, principled, and the way she looked at Milton carried quiet sincerity. Nothing calculated, nothing opportunistic. After she left, Milton lingered in the doorway of my office. "She seems wonderful," I said. "She is." He hesitated. "Dad, I know it's soon after everything, but Sarah makes me feel like I can trust again, like I can build something real." 6 months earlier, he'd been married to a woman who had conspired to end his life. Now he was daring to open his heart again. That kind of courage doesn't make headlines. It happens quietly, in small choices. To risk, to believe, to try. "Trust your instincts," I told him. "You've earned the right to be happy." That evening, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset stretch across the sky in bands of gold and fading amber. My shoulder had healed, leaving only a narrow scar from that night in the storage unit. The body mends efficiently, the heart takes its time, but both, if given patience, can find their way back to strength. My phone buzzed. A message from Detective Rodriguez. "Derek Morrison died in prison today. Heart attack. Thought you should know." I stared at the screen for a long while. 41 years old, physically healthy, aside from ambition turned poisonous. There was a strange irony in it. The man who had plotted to simulate a cardiac arrest had succumbed to a real one, but I didn't feel triumph, only stillness. A door closing. Derek Morrison would never manipulate, threaten, or destroy another life again. Justice had run its course. The ledger was balanced. An hour later, Milton joined me on the porch, carrying his own glass of wine. "She called me too," he said, settling into the chair beside mine. "How do you feel?" I considered it carefully. "Relieved," I said, "and grateful. Grateful we survived. Grateful we found each other again. Grateful we learned who our real family is." I lifted my glass toward the first appearing stars. "To second chances, son." He touched his glass gently to mine. "To second chances, Dad, and to the people who deserve them." We sat in companionable silence as night settled around us. No sirens, no smoke, no secrets. Just the steady rhythm of crickets and the quiet understanding that sometimes destruction clears the ground for something better. Not perfect, not untouched by pain, but honest. And that was enough. Somewhere beyond the neighborhood trees, traffic hummed. A reminder that the world kept moving, indifferent to individual tragedy. But on my porch, with my son alive and steady beside me, there was a stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. Inside, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 measured notes. Its mechanism had once hidden secrets and codes. Now it simply marked the hour. Milton had repaired it himself after moving back in, cleaned the gears, recalibrated the pendulum, restored its honest rhythm. No hidden compartments, no contingency plans. Just time doing what it has always done, moving forward. I thought about Mallory occasionally. She was serving her sentence in a women's prison 3 hours north. The papers reported that she had become a model inmate, working in the library, enrolling in correspondence courses, keeping to herself, perhaps, stripped of manipulation and performance. She was finally confronting who she really was. I didn't know. Forgiveness wasn't mine to grant. That belonged to Milton, but I had learned something quieter and perhaps more necessary. Letting go of anger is not an act of mercy toward someone else. It's an act of preservation for yourself. Hatred corrodes the vessel that carries it. So I released it, not for her sake, for my own peace. As for Derek, his story had reached its natural end. He had made deliberate choices, and the consequences had followed with equal certainty. There was no mystery left in that equation. Milton leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Strange how everything changes," he said. "And yet, some things don't." "What stays the same?" I asked. He glanced toward the house, toward the clock, toward the quiet glow of light through the kitchen window. "Family," he said simply. I nodded. We had lost a house, a business, illusions we didn't even know we were clinging to. But we had kept what mattered, and in some ways we had gained more than we'd lost. The night deepened around us, cool and clear. Tomorrow would bring client meetings, paperwork, maybe new challenges. Life would continue its steady rhythm, and this time we were ready for it. No secrets, no shadows, just second chances, and the wisdom to recognize them. His story was over, but ours was just beginning. Dad, Milton's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Yes, son? Thank you for believing in me, for trusting my plan, for risking your life to help me. I know it wasn't easy. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder, feeling the solid living weight of him beneath my hand. That's what family does, Milton. We protect each other, no matter the cost. He smiled, and in the soft porch light, he looked young again. Not the haunted man who had staged his own death, but the boy who used to help me rake leaves on Sunday afternoons. The boy who brought me coffee when I worked late. The boy who called every week just to say hello. That boy had grown into a man of courage and calculation. A man capable of deep love and hard-earned forgiveness. A man who understood that sometimes the only way to save your family is to risk everything for it. The stars began appearing overhead, small points of light scattered across an endless sky. Darkness didn't feel threatening anymore, not when you weren't facing it alone. And for the first time since that terrible day at the funeral home, I felt something steady and certain rise inside me. Hope. Milton was alive. Our family was safe. And sometimes, that's the only victory that truly matters. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think about Milton's journey and second chances. And make sure you subscribe to the channel A Father's Wrath for more powerful, emotional stories about family, justice, betrayal, and redemption. Your support means everything.